welcome to our session today about the clarinet choir. My name is Mitchell Estrin, and I'm a very enthusiastic devotee of the clarinet choir. And I'm here with my colleagues, Barbara Heilmair from Portland State University, and of course, a gentleman that needs no introduction is Matt Johnston, who has enriched our literature so much with all of his fantastic arrangements that I know we've all played. And so what we wanted to do today is to just open it up for questions and hopefully, get into some depth about some things to do with clarinet choir. Let me start just by talk a little bit about history for just a moment. The medium of the clarinet choir started at the end of the 19th century in Belgium by Gustave Poncelet, who was the clarinet professor at the Brussels Conservatory. And many of his students came to the United States at the early part of the 20th century, and that's where the roots kind of started in the United States. The most famous of the American clarinet choirs was the Simeon Bellison Clarinet Choir, which was sponsored by the New York Philharmonic. And that choir functioned from 1927 until 1938. And they actually played their concerts in Carnegie Hall. And Bellison's choir was quite large, up to 75, and he often added a lot of other instruments to his group. He added percussion, he added sometimes brass, and he had a very, very wonderful choir. And his library now lives in Israel, in an archive in Israel. So if you ever want to see it, it's there to be looked at. The clarinet choir movement in the United States sort of came into its heyday in the 1950s with a movement called the Balanced Clarinet Choir Movement. And that was sort of founded by a group of American educators, people like Lucien Callier and Thomas Ayers, James DeJesu, Harvey Herman, David Height, Russell Howland, Don McCatherine, Harold Palmer, Alfred Reed, some of the luminary names that really got involved in this balanced clarinet choir movement, where they used a smaller instrumentation and going for an acoustically balanced ensemble. So I think that the most difficult aspect of clarinet choir for all of us, and in terms of what music to play, and is really what instrumentation do we have in our group. That's the biggest challenge. Now, I'm really lucky because at my university, I have access to use both E flat and B flat contra. I have alto clarinets and basset horns, but everybody does not have those instruments. And that does make it a little bit challenging. So I think that that's the number one challenge that a lot of us face, because we never really know exactly what instruments and how many players we're going to have in our ensemble. So there's nothing really considered a so-called standard instrumentation. So anyway, welcome to this session, and we'd like to open it up for questions, and I look forward to hearing what my colleagues have to say. Please feel free to either raise your hand or
Yes.
throw a question in the chat.
Hi, Mitch.
Yes.
Hi, how are you? You're the
Great.
guy that wrote the book on Stairway to Rockland, the Clarinet Master.
Right.
I knew them very well. But here's my question: where there are clarinet choirs? I live on Long Island, okay, and I don't see anything happening in the horizon. There doesn't seem to be any clarinet choirs other than maybe a university. And even in the local colleges, they don't, hardly any of them really have clarinet choirs.
That's a great question, and I'll tell you that certain universities do have them, but a lot of universities don't. I found in my experience that schools will often form a choir just for a specific purpose, like for a concert. Whereas what I've done in my curriculum at my school is it's part of the curriculum. We meet every week, and there are other professors that do the same thing. As far as like for community ensembles, some of the New Horizons groups, like Alan Moy, who is with us today, he has a New Horizon group in Rochester, and they have a very large clarinet choir there. So it's incumbent upon you to form a group in your area. But if you have the wherewithal to go to Clarinet Fest, there are these mass choirs that everybody can play in. There's something for everybody. If you're a professional educator, teacher, professor, you can play in the professor's choir. There's the festival choir, which is made up of enthusiasts from all over the world. And there's also a college choir for university students. So a lot of times these large conferences will have mass choirs in order to participate in. But it's really incumbent upon you where you live to find other enthusiasts like you and find what instrumentation you have and then try to match the music to that. Barbara, you have anything you want to add to that?
I guess I was nodding all the time, so yes. Thank you. Yes, Joshua, hello. So that's actually exactly what we have been doing here in Portland. While on the West Coast, we have quite some clarinet choirs already, even in our state, but not in our town. And then John Gibson, who is here today with us, and we played together in an orchestra, and he asked me at some point if I would take this on to together with him found a clarinet choir. And for years I have actually resisted because I mean everybody is so busy, and it's if you're taking this on, you want to do it well, right? And for this to go on,
It's a challenge. Oh yeah, it's a
and
challenge.
to find the location and everything. And then in 2007 I have not given in, but I thought it was the right time. 2017, excuse me. So goes too fast, everything. 2017, we have founded a clarinet choir here in Portland, the Zephyr Clarinet Choir, but it's been taken quite some years to really build it up. And now I would say we are kind of excited about it. And it is not, while we are rehearsing currently at the university, it's now no more only linked to that. So it's nice to have outside people doing that. It might actually be more stable, but it depends.
Yeah.
We have a question. Oh, go ahead, Joshua.
Oh, the other thing is, okay, so COVID has really hit us hard, and it's sometimes it's hard to find other avenues. I understand there may be computer software programs that one could play, let's say, take out the Brahms Sonata and play with like an interactive piano accompaniment. Now, smart music did start out that way, but it seems to drift away into more or less for school band, like elementary through high school purposes. And I find it very hard to navigate that website. It's impossible.
Is there a community band in your area where you live?
I play in a community band.
So what about talking to your clarinet colleagues in the community band to see if they want to form a clarinet choir?
It's possible, but we're like 3 or 4 clarinet players.
Right. So, well, thank you for those questions, Joshua. We have a couple of questions in the chat. So Cynthia asked about how to create a clear, balanced a sound in a clarinet choir. And that's a difficult thing to do. One of the things that I will say is that clarinet choirs can often sound a little bit top heavy with treble lines, because it's the nature of our instrument. It gets rather incisive and bright, especially with E-flat clarinet on the top. The first thing I would say is, unless the orchestration calls for it, I would never use 2 E-flat clarinets for obvious reasons. And the other thing I would say is to pyramid your B-flats. This is a concept I got from a gentleman named Harvey Herman, who had the clarinet choir at the University of Illinois for many years, one of the finest collegiate choirs really ever. And Harvey said you have to pyramid. In other words, if you have, let's say, 10 B flats in your group, to use 2 on first, let's say you're dividing by 3, 2 on first, 4 on second, and 4 or 3 on second, and then 5 on third. So you're always pyramiding. So you're using less top voice, and that gives the ensemble a better sound. The other thing that Harvey felt, and I agree with him, is that the middle voice is often lacking. You have a good bass with bass clarinets and contras, and then you have the high voices, but the middle is often lacking. So he actually used 6 alto clarinets in his group because he had them. How many people have 6 alto clarinets in their ensemble? They don't. So we've always used 2 in my group. But what you can do is, and thank you to Matt Johnston, and this is a challenge for arranging, is sometimes he will double the alto clarinet line in a 4th or a 5th clarinet part. How do you handle that, Matt, when you are arranging?
Yeah, I would say I used to not do that. I used to be very trusting of the alto clarinet, and as someone who has an alto clarinet, I used to have two because I had a backup. I've really just tried to vouch for it over time, and it's hard to balance being realistic. And so maybe 10 years ago, I did start including an alternate B flat part most of the time, an alternate B flat part. If it goes really low a lot, I would do an extra bass part. Yeah, it's just so important to have that middle voice. And I think the benefit of the alto clarinet and consequently basset horn is that they're still around. There's more bassets that are available now than ever. Altos are still available for the right person that wants to invest in them, but yeah, I've just always found it's so important. And as you said, to balance the choir, of course, you want it to be, you want even more basses and you want even more contras. The only logistical problem is that they get more expensive, and it's difficult to have sometimes even one contra, let alone you should have 3 or 4. But yeah, I think you, as you said, most important, you just have to pyramid it in one E flat, and just kind of like you would do in a concert band. And yeah, alternate parts, embrace them. I always try to arrange with those lower parts in mind. I'm not just giving the middle low parts boring parts. So that's another thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, it's all about the pyramiding and having a lot of middle voice. I think that helps a lot with the balance. The other thing that I've done too, and this is available for some arrangements and some not, but adding a string bass on the bottom really does add a nice sonic layer on the bottom of the group. It also, if you use an E flat contra alto and a B flat contrabass, it kind of glues the sound of those two instruments together. So that's a really nice thing to do if you have a string bass player in your organization that can help you and play. We have a question from Debbie. What is the optimal size of a clarinet choir? I would say, how many people do you have in your community? Really, optimal size, I would say, is probably for a balanced clarinet choir, is somewhere around 20. I would say, where you have both contras, you have 2 altos, you probably have 3 or 4 basses, 1 E flat and the rest on B flat clarinets in an optimal situation. But I have conducted choirs anywhere from 8 through 370 something that we did in Knoxville, the world's largest clarinet choir that we did in Knoxville. Some of you may have participated in that. So optimal is how many people can you get together that will commit to doing the group, and then finding music that's going to fit that. But if I had to write my own script where I could have anything I wanted, I would say about 20 is about right for me.
Yeah.
Barbara, what do you think? What's your optimal size?
20 sounds great. I was just talking with somebody in the chat. One factor is to really have your group of regulars. So if you can guarantee that with 20 to have them most of the time, then that's great. I also think that in many pieces, there's still some sort of chamber music element. Really depends what you're playing. So I, for some reason, like 15. But it really, in our group, we have maybe a couple of altos, and if I'm just thinking about adding more on, then we would be at 20 easily. Bigger than 20, I think, would be a whole other animal almost. It becomes like a really large ensemble. Yeah, and then it depends how many people do you want to have on one part. Some pieces require to have that many different parts, so then having more people is good, but the question is, do you want to have 6 or 8 people on one part, right? It's also a pedagogical question.
So we have a question from Martina. Any tips when putting a clarinet choir together? Well, I think the hardest thing is finding the actual instruments. You may have the players that would like to play contra or play alto, and you don't have an instrument. So the hardest thing, first of all, is finding the players to be in the group, and then finding the instruments. These days, getting music is so much easier. I mean, I'm constantly emailing with Matt, and he's PDFing things to me. One of my students lost the 3rd clarinet part. Please send me a replacement, Matt. But I think having the instruments is really the biggest challenge. So because, I mean, I'm so lucky that my university has a rosewood contrabass clarinet. I recently looked at the prices for insurance purposes, and they cost about $35,000. So I mean, everybody can't buy a contrabass clarinet. So these are challenges. I think the biggest challenge is finding people that have the instruments that want to play. So
Can I add to that?
sure.
Yeah, it's just I'm here in the UK. And what it is that we're in our wind band, and our clarinet section, which I'm part of, we are going to do a special section for a concert, and we're going to play Moon Dance. So it was just interesting to hear, because we've sort of divided us up. There's 15 of us, so Barbara, so that's about 15 of us. We've got 2 bass clarinets, 1 E flat, and then we've divided the parts up to the rest of the B flats, because we haven't got an alto, the alto. But it was interesting to hear about how you pyramid it to the piece that we're doing. I think we've just about, and I just wanted to make sure we were getting the balance right, and hopefully what we're not just going to do, it's not going to be just a one-off, I'm hoping.
Well, thank you, Martina. We have a question from Josie. Josie says she'll be subbing a clarinet choir performance for the first time next week with 1 rehearsal. What do I need to know, or what is most different from playing in band? So, Barbara, you want to tackle that one?
Yes, and I have already replied to her, and hopefully everybody can see it. So I suggested to really look at your part and the score, and see what your role is really going to be. And it depends on the piece, and it depends on the part. If you're going to be more like in a really wind band section, if it's a march, then you will have similarities there, and it also depends on the arrangement. But if the literature is similar to wind band, then you will be quite in that setting. If it's an arrangement that comes, well, even in wind band, you may have some solo lines or thin texture with either solo or just 2 or 3 voices together, then you will feel more like in chamber music. So I think the preparation is really to know your part and what you're supposed to do there. And of course, it's always helpful to listen to a recording. I would say if it's an arrangement, listen to the original or other arrangements, because there could be several of one piece if it's a popular piece. So really be ready. Also, that goes practically, I think, for any group that works with a conductor, because that's the big difference. You're going to be in a conducted group, not a chamber group, to be ready to take it at different tempi and to really also blend in. So there you're more in your large ensemble setting. So know your part and be ready to adapt if asked to. That's my take at it.
You know, another big challenge about the auxiliary instruments is a lot of time they're in disrepair. There's nothing more frustrating than picking up an alto or a bass or a contra that hasn't been played in a year, where either the joints don't fit together well, or the key work, the pads aren't covering, or there's keys bent. So it's important, if you're going to ask someone to play one of the auxiliaries, that it's in good playing condition. And one of my mentors was David Height, and David taught me a great deal about clarinet choir. And he said, he stressed the importance, no surprise, of having good mouthpieces for all of the auxiliary instruments. Very, very important, because it can be a nightmare to play on an instrument that either does not work properly or where the mouthpiece is not good. So, of course, these things come with expense, and hopefully there are people in your communities that have instruments and are willing to play them. But sometimes it can be difficult to find. And I see that Josie also said that they're playing Matt's Organ Symphony, which is a fantastic arrangement. You know, I want to ask Matt, because I've known him for a lot of years now. And Matt, how do you manage to get such an amazing quality and richness in the clarinet choir, where sometimes I don't even miss the original instrumentation? Like when I've done many times things like the whole suites or the Ralph Vaughan Williams English folk song suite, I mean, of course, it's not the original, but I don't miss it. It sounds complete to me. How do you manage to do that?
Well, I mean, at first I have to give credit to the original composers because the way they wrote it is just brilliant in the first place. And I always, whenever people congratulate me, I'm like, oh wait, wait a second, Holst wrote it. It's the way I always perceive it. I think of it as a puzzle, and the way I look at the full score and I just think, okay, I need to get all these parts in here. And a lot of times what I see is like, okay, it should be appropriate for each instrument. And so should the bass or the contra be going above the break? Not necessarily. I mean, it's okay if they do at times, but it's a bass instrument. It's a contra instrument. It should be kind of in its place. And I used to be a lot more adventurous than I am now. And I'm a little more conservative now. But I think it's just keeping with the pyramid balance too. You don't want to have too many people up in the stratosphere. You want to have a good middle and a good solid foundation. But to me, arranging it's a puzzle, and I love the challenge of, if I have 8 parts to put everything in, sometimes you do have to pick and choose. Sometimes you add another instrument because there's so much extra to add, but it's I don't know, it's just taking into consideration, especially if it's an orchestral piece. If you have a violin part or a viola part, you have to realize, okay, there will be 10 or 20 players playing this part, so you have to make sure you account for that. You can't just have one single clarinet playing a violin line versus everybody else. So it's a whole bunch of things, but to me it's just a kind of a fun jigsaw puzzle.
Another thing, if you're starting up a group at the beginning, is to choose literature that's appropriate to start out. I mean, we all want to play some of the more florid lines in the clarinet parts, but we want to choose material to start out with a group that's not too difficult, so that you can get sort of a sound of your group, and then you can increase the difficulty as you go along. I run a camp in the summertime for high school students, and I'm always very careful because I never quite know what I'm going to have in my group. So I make sure that I choose literature that's challenging enough, but not over anybody's head. And as we get further into the time, then I can up the difficulty level in the literature. So I think choosing appropriate pieces, and not where you're going to have to leave out lines, that's another thing that's difficult.
And I think for some people that ask about starting a choir, oftentimes, in addition to the instrumental logistics, sometimes the logistics of finding a rehearsal time or a space can be challenging, because even in my choir I play in now, everybody in the choir is also playing in some local regional band. And so, okay, they're busy on that night, so you have to find a time that you can rehearse with another group. And so I think what helps is, I did this back when I lived in Seattle, is you kind of start with a quartet, and then maybe you expand from there. You still keep playing quartet repertoire. Maybe you have 8 players, you still keep playing quartet stuff, and then you kind of let it develop organically. I think a lot of choirs start that way, where and a lot of it's interpersonal relationships too. You have to like the people you play with, usually. So you can start with a smaller group and then double parts, expand, and then play a sextet, and go from there. But yeah, the logistics of just rehearsal time and space can be challenging too sometimes.
Yeah, that's a great point, Matt, about if you have a group that's, let's say, 8 people, is to just play quartet music and double the parts. That's a great way to start out. And also, this event today is a great example of bringing hundreds of people together from across the world. You can bring people together within your own community. Now, with our electronic communications, we should be able to reach out to people in our communities to find people with similar interests and who might be interested in playing in a clarinet choir. Because I don't know, it's a sound like no other. They say when a clarinet choir is right, it sounds like a pipe organ. Any other questions? Well, let me say this on behalf of Barbara, Matt, and myself. Thank you very much for visiting with us today, and thanks for participating in this event today. The ICA is a great organization, and I hope a lot of you will be able to attend Clarinet Fest, and if not this year, in future years, because if you love clarinet choir, you can hear some great groups performing at ICA at Clarinet Fest. And also you get to play in these clarinet choirs there, and you get to play in these groups that are much larger than you'll get to play in your community. And I have to tell you that one of my greatest experiences as a clarinet choir director was the one that sticks out in my mind was in Orlando. The professor's choir in Orlando was just a most memorable performance for me, maybe the finest choir I've ever had the privilege to conduct. But that one sticks out in my mind as something that will always be with me as a great moment in music for me. So I hope you all have those moments in clarinet choir. And all I can tell you is that I've played all the music, and our friend Matt Johnston's arrangements are the best. Absolutely, just unbelievably great. He's such a gifted, talented person. And also, I know that Barbara and I have collaborated and talked about choirs quite a bit. It's a defining passion for both of us, and I'm grateful for both of you, and thank you all so much for visiting with us today.
Thank you so much. Yes. Wonderful.
Any last questions before we go into the next?
Thank you, Mitch.
You're welcome. It's a defining passion. I found that that it's kind of a little like brush fire. You know, I think that any students that don't want to do it, once they start doing it, they're hooked. They're hooked. And of course, I have a captive audience. Those of us that are either high school or university teachers have a captive audience. We have a clarinet section at our disposal. For those of you who are out there in the community, you don't have that. So all you can do is reach out. And I think the community bands are really a great place to reach out to your clarinet colleagues to start a choir. And somebody always wants to conduct, you know that. So you don't have to worry about getting a conductor. Anyway, a great pleasure seeing all of you, and keep the clarinet choir fires burning.
And use it for new avenues, new pieces, underrepresented folks that can have a voice through it, and new sound colors, new possibilities. We have freedom with it. I really like it. New possibilities.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you so much. See you in the main room. Bye.